The night settles softly around you, and as you sink deeper into comfort, allow your mind to wander far beyond the present moment. Let the noise of the day fade into the distance, like footsteps dissolving on an empty road. In this gentle stillness, imagine yourself drifting backward to the layers of time, past the cities and lights you know, past the modern hum of life, moving slowly into a world shaped by stone silence, candlelight, and faith. A world where stories traveled not through screens or books, but through whispered tales by firelight. A world where the sacred and mysterious lived side by side. Imagine the air growing cooler, the stars above you growing clearer, untouched by smoke or pollution. It is a medieval world, wrapped in darkness except for the flicker of torches and the glimmer of moonlight on ancient walls. You are standing at the edge of a landscape that once shaped the destiny of kings, pilgrims, and warriors. A landscape that held within a group of men whose name would echo in legend for centuries. The Knights Templar. For now, you are not concerned with battles or politics or anything troubling. You are simply observing, like a quiet traveler stepping into history without disturbing a single leaf. The wind moves gently across the hills, carrying the faint sound of distant bells from a monastery far away. The road beneath your feet is worn smooth by countless footsteps, pilgrims, merchants, holy men, and wanderers seeking something greater than themselves. It is along these roads that the story of the Templars first takes shape, rooted in devotion, fear, hope, and the longing for safety in an unpredictable world. Take a slow breath, letting the stillness settle into you. You are safe here, guided only by calm storytelling meant to lull your thoughts into quiet reflection. As your mind softens, picture a soft golden glow appear on the horizon, growing brighter as if welcoming you into the tale. That glow belongs to the memory of medieval Jerusalem, a city both holy and contested, sacred and fragile. The Templar story begins here, in a land where faith was powerful enough to move armies and inspire nations. The streets of Jerusalem at night would be narrow and winding, lined with stone walls still warm from the day's heat. Oil lamps would flicker gently, lighting the faces of pilgrims who traveled from faraway lands to walk the steps they believed prophets once walked. Many of these travelers were tired, hungry, unprotected. Bandits and raiders haunted the roads leading to the city, making journeys perilous. It was into this environment of danger and devotion that the first whispers of a brotherhood emerged. Ordinary knights who wished to do something extraordinary, protect those who could not protect themselves. But before we reach those knights, rest your mind in the atmosphere of the era. Life was slower, quieter, ruled by rhythm and ritual. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the chant of monks echoing through stone halls, the rustle of robes on dusty pathways, all gentle, steady sound that shaped the medieval world. Imagine walking past a group of monks reciting prayers under their breath, the words flowing like soft river currents. Imagine passing merchants packing their goods for the next morning's trade, their movements slow and methodical. The Templars were born from this world, one where faith was not simply a belief, but a guiding force that shaped every breath and every decision. People prayed before meals, before journeys, before taking up a sword, and even before opening their eyes in the morning. Danger was real, but so was devotion. And in this mixture of uncertainty and hope, the idea of a dedicated band of protectors felt like a blessing, a reassuring presence in a land filled with both miracles and fear. Let your mind drift deeper into that sense of reassurance, as though you are stepping to quiet halls of an ancient fortress lit only by moonbeams slipping through narrow windows. You hear the soft echo of footsteps far away, the steady breathing of men asleep in their cots, their armor stored neatly beside them. These are not yet the legendary Templars as history remembers them, but ordinary knights on the cusp of forming something greater, something that will outlive them by centuries, something that will weave itself into myth, mystery, and fascination. For now, imagine them resting after a long day, cleaning equipment, tending to their horses, sharing simple meals of bread, olives, and dried fruit. Their conversations are quiet, thoughtful, shaped by the knowledge that they are far from home, in a land where every sunrise brings new uncertainty. Yet there is a sense of purpose among them, a calmness born from their belief that their actions hold meaning. As these men rest, pilgrims sleep nearby in crowded lodgings, clutching their belongings, grateful for the slightest sense of safety. You can picture the blend of exhaustion and relief in their eyes. For many, reaching Jerusalem was the greatest journey of their lives. This is a world into which the Templars step. Quietly at first, only a handful of humble knights, but guided by a vision strong enough to defy time. As you breathe gently and let your thoughts settle, you can sense that this is the beginning of a story not only about warfare or faith, but about transformation. How a small, determined group can rise to become one of the most powerful and enigmatic orders the world has ever known. Let the edges of the scene soften now, like the end of a dream. The glow of Jerusalem dims, the night deepens, and all the sounds fade into the soft rhythm of your own breathing. You are simply floating in the calm before the Templars' journey begins, a peaceful space between past and present, perfectly still, perfectly quiet. The world before the rise of the Knights Templar was a place shaped by tension, devotion, and longing. It was a landscape suspended between hope and fear, where kingdoms rose and fell like tides, and where distant travelers carried both dreams and dangers on their shoulders. As you allow yourself to drift deeper into this story, imagine that you are walking through a land touched by centuries of belief, a place where sacred histories overlap like soft layers of parchment. This is the world of the late 11th and early 12th centuries, a world preparing unknowingly for the birth of an order that would forever change the course of medieval history. Imagine Europe during this time. Quiet villages scattered across rolling fields, wooden homes clustered near small streams, and forests stretching wide and deep like vast oceans of shadow. Life was simple, yet not easy. People lived close to the land, waking and sleeping with the sun, tending animals, trading goods, and clinging to faith as their strongest anchor. Churches rose above communities like guardians of stone, and every toll of the bell reminded people of heaven, of hope, and the fragile thinness of life. Across this landscape, news traveled slowly, passed between merchants, pilgrims, and wandering monks who moved from one settlement to another. And the news that spread in these years was filled with stories of a distant, sacred city, Jerusalem. To many in Europe, Jerusalem was not merely a place on a map, but a glowing symbol of salvation, sacrifice, and divine promise. It existed in the imagination like a beacon, calling out to believers, stirring hearts with longing and wonder. But the road to Jerusalem was not simple. For centuries, the holy city had been controlled by different empires, Byzantines, Persians, Arab caliphates, each leaving its mark on the cultural and spiritual landscape. By the late 11th century, the region was governed by the Seljuk Turks, whose expansion into Byzantine territories created tension and uncertainty. Pilgrims who journeyed to the Holy Land began returning home with stories not only of beauty and sacredness, but of hardship, danger, and fear. As you breathe gently and settle deeper into the quiet of this moment, imagine a pilgrim from Europe, perhaps a humble farmer with little more than a tunic, a wooden staff, and the hope of touching the places he had heard about since childhood. His journey begins in the early morning light, but the path before him stretches for thousands of miles. He walks through forests that whisper with unseen creatures, across mountains wrapped in fog, and along roads where the only companions are his prayers and the steady rhythm of his feet. Many pilgrims never made it. The routes were treacherous, filled with bandits who watched from hidden paths, waiting for weary travelers to pass. Hunger, illness, and the harshness of the environment claimed countless lives. And even if a pilgrim reached Jerusalem, the journey home remained uncertain. Yet people continued to walk these paths, guided not by safety but by devotion strong enough to outshine fear. This atmosphere of uncertainty and longing set the stage for a dramatic shift in the world. In 1095, Pope Urban II delivered a call that echoed across Europe, a call for Christians to journey east not as individual travelers but as a united force. His message, spoken with urgency and passion, invited knights, peasants, nobles, and wanderers to take part in a sacred mission to reclaim Jerusalem and protect those who journeyed to it. The First Crusade, born from this call, was a powerful mixture of religious fervor, political ambition, and deep emotion. Thousands answered, gathering in small and large groups, traveling across Europe like rolling waves. The journey was difficult, and the Crusaders faced countless obstacles. Yet after years of marching, fighting, and enduring hardship, they reached Jerusalem in 1099 and captured the city after a brutal siege. The capture of Jerusalem changed everything. For a moment, it seemed like victory had brought peace, like the long struggle had finally opened the way for safe pilgrimage. But the peace was fragile, more like a thin layer of dust settled over a restless landscape than a true transformation. The surrounding regions remained unstable, and the roads leading to the holy city were still dangerous. The Crusaders who stayed behind worked to build new states, known as the Crusader kingdoms, but these young territories faced constant threats from rival powers and shifting alliances. As you imagine this world, picture a traveler approaching Jerusalem after the First Crusade. The walls of the city rise before him, ancient and silent, reflecting the warm light of the sun. The gates are guarded by Crusader soldiers, weary yet determined. Inside, the narrow streets are filled with a blend of languages, Latin, French, Greek, Arabic, all mingling together like threads in a tapestry. Churches are being repaired, markets are bustling, and pilgrims walk with renewed hope. Yet beneath this surface lies a trembling uncertainty, a sense that something is missing, something essential for the safety and stability of those who travel this sacred land. This missing piece would soon come in the form of a brotherhood unlike any the world had seen before. But before their arrival, the region remained vulnerable. The Crusader states were small and isolated, surrounded by powerful neighbors. Armies could not protect every road, every valley, or every mountain pass, and pilgrims continued to be attacked, robbed, or worse. Many were left stranded on the roadside with no hope of rescue. Europe, too, sensed that the mission in the Holy Land was far from complete. Letters and messengers brought news of continued danger, stirring the hearts of knights who felt called to defend their faith not only through battle but through service. Among them were men who believed that the greatest act of devotion was not conquest, but protection, standing as silent guardians for those who could not fight for themselves. The world before the Templars was awakening, slowly, like a dawn spreading across quiet fields. The need for safety grew clearer with each passing year. The dream of peaceful pilgrimage had not yet been achieved, and the echoes of distant danger reached even the smallest villages of Europe. In this atmosphere, a world caught between triumph and uncertainty, between sacred hope and earthly danger, the seeds of the Knights Templar were planted. And though no one knew it yet, the brotherhood that would arise from these seeds would become one of the most extraordinary, influential, and mysterious orders in all of medieval history. In the quiet years after the First Crusade, when the dust of battle had settled and the glow of victory had softened into memory, the Holy Land entered a fragile period of rebuilding. The Crusader kingdoms were young and vulnerable, still learning how to stand on their own. Pilgrims continued to pour into Jerusalem with hopeful hearts, yet danger still clung to the roads like a lingering shadow. It was during this delicate moment in history that a small but determined spark appeared, one that would soon grow into a powerful flame. And at the center of that spark stood a man named Hugues de Payens. Imagine him not as a legendary figure carved into stone or portrayed in grand paintings, but as a quiet, thoughtful knight shaped by devotion and purpose. Hugues was a nobleman from a region of Champagne in France, known for his steady character and unwavering faith. He did not seek glory or riches. Instead, he carried within him a simple yet profound desire to protect those who journeyed to the Holy Land in search of spiritual meaning. Picture him traveling across Europe toward Jerusalem, the weight of armor on his shoulders, dust on his boots, and a determined calm in his eyes. His journey would have been long and exhausting, crossing rivers, climbing mountains, and passing through towns filled with both curiosity and fear. Yet he kept moving, guided by a purpose that felt larger than himself. When he finally reached the Holy Land, he saw the reality that many had spoken of, the danger that still lurked on the roads, the fear etched into the faces of pilgrims, and the fragile state of the Crusader territories. In this world, Hugues found companions who shared his calling. They were not numerous. They were not wealthy. They were simply knights who understood that service could be a greater act of courage than warfare. Among them was a man named Godfrey de St. Omer, whose sincerity and devotion matched Hugues' own. One by one, these knights gathered, forming a small brotherhood bound not by wealth or force, but by a shared vow to protect the vulnerable. Their group was humble at the beginning. Imagine them meeting in quiet corners of Jerusalem, speaking softly as they discussed their dreams. There were no grand halls, no banners, no symbols of future power. Their possessions were few, and their intentions were pure. They pledged themselves to a mission of guarding the roads leading to the holy city, paths where pilgrims often fell victim to thieves or raiders. This was not glamorous work. It required patient endurance and a willingness to stand watch over miles of lonely terrain. Yet these knights embraced the task with quiet determination, believing that every traveler they protected brought them closer to serving God in a way they felt called to. At night, they would sit around small fires, sharpening their swords, repairing their gear, and sharing simple meals. Their conversations were likely filled with reflections, stories of the pilgrims they had helped, fears for the future, and hopes for the brotherhood they were building. Their early home was as humble as their beginnings. They were granted temporary quarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, in an area believed by many to be the former site of King Solomon's temple. This place, steeped in ancient history and spiritual significance, inspired the name they would one day carry throughout the world. But at this early stage, they lived modestly, without the wealth or power that people would later associate with the Templars. Imagine their daily routine: waking before dawn, offering quiet prayers in the dim glow of early morning light, then setting out along the dusty roads. They watched the movement of travelers, scanning the horizon for any sign of threat. Their horses moved at a steady pace, hooves tapping softly on the earth. The air carried scents of sand, earth, and distant olive groves. Sometimes the roads were peaceful, and the knights rode in comfortable silence. At other times, they intervened, driving off attackers or guiding frightened travelers to safety. Pilgrims who met these knights often spoke of them with gratitude. Though they were few in number, their presence brought comfort, like a warm light flickering in the distance. And their reputation slowly spread from one traveler to another, from Jerusalem to Jaffa, from Jaffa back to Europe. Tales of a small band of knights, dedicated entirely to protecting pilgrims, began making their way across continents. But as their name spread, so did the realization that their mission needed more than courage alone. They needed structure. They needed recognition. They needed the support of leaders who could legitimize their calling and help them grow. Hughes de Payens understood this better than anyone. He was not only a warrior but a thoughtful strategist. He recognized that their mission could only survive if it became an official order, something acknowledged by both the church and the rulers of the Crusader states. And so, this small band of knights, bound by devotion and driven by purpose, began seeking formal recognition. Imagine Hughes carefully preparing for these conversations, standing tall in simple yet worn armor, speaking with clarity and humility. He had no desire to impress with wealth or showmanship. His strength came from sincerity, from the undeniable truth that pilgrims were still in danger and that someone needed to protect them. The ruler of Jerusalem at that time, King Baldwin II, saw potential in what these knights were attempting. He understood the challenges they faced and recognized the value of their mission. Their request was simple yet profound, a formal acknowledgement of their brotherhood and permission to continue their work with the church's blessing. As you picture these moments, imagine the atmosphere of the early Crusader court. Torches flickering against stone walls, the hum of quiet conversations, the sense that history was quietly turning a new page. No one present could have known that this small, earnest group of knights would grow into one of the most influential orders the medieval world had ever seen. For now, they remained humble, just a handful of devoted men trying to build something meaningful in a world filled with uncertainty. Yet their determination, their unity, and their unwavering belief in their mission created a spark that would soon ignite into a powerful force. In the gentle stillness of this moment, imagine these 9 knights standing together, not seeking fame or fortune, but simply committing themselves to one another and to the travelers who depended on them. Their story was only beginning. The world had not yet heard of the Knights Templar, but the foundation was set, the vision was clear, and the brotherhood that would one day shape legends was quietly, steadily taking form. The small brotherhood that Hughes de Payens began was steady and sincere, but without recognition from the world around them, their mission remained fragile. They lived simply on the Temple Mount, their resources limited, their duties demanding. Yet something quiet and powerful was growing among them. Their purpose was clear, their bond unshakable, and their dedication unwavering. What began as a small group of knights was ready, though they did not yet realize it, to transform into a formal order, one that would stand at the crossroads of faith, duty, and history. To truly understand their rise, imagine the atmosphere of Jerusalem during this time. The Crusader kingdom was still young, its foundations not yet firm. Kings and nobles worked tirelessly to secure alliances, repair fortifications, and establish a sense of stability in a land that had known conflict for generations. Amid the political concerns and military responsibilities, the safety of pilgrims remained a constant worry. Reports of ambushes and assaults continued to reach the royal court. Every lost traveler was a tragic reminder that victory alone could not guarantee peace. King Baldwin II, who ruled at the time, was a man accustomed to balancing hope and hardship. He had seen the struggles of pilgrims firsthand and understood how crucial the roads were to the Holy Land's spiritual identity. When news of the small band of knights, humble, disciplined, and unwavering, reached him, he recognized their value immediately. Picture Baldwin II observing the group with quiet curiosity. He saw not soldiers seeking glory, but guardians serving with humility. Their devotion impressed him, and their mission resonated deeply with his duty to protect the kingdom. When Hughes de Payens approached him with a proposal to formally acknowledge the Brotherhood, Baldwin did not hesitate. He granted them a portion of the royal palace on the Temple Mount as their headquarters, a place steeped in history, revered by many as the site of Solomon's ancient temple. In the stillness of that place, surrounded by ancient stone walls and echoes of sacred pasts, the Brotherhood felt the weight and significance of their calling. Their new quarters were not luxurious by any means. They were simple, austere, and suited to men who had sworn to live in poverty. Yet the location carried meaning. It gave their mission structure, identity, and a home that tied them to something much larger than themselves. But a home was not enough. For the order to survive, it needed spiritual authority. And that authority would come from one of the most influential religious voices of the time, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was a monk, a theologian, and a man whose words shaped the direction of Christian devotion across Europe. His reputation for deep piety gave him a unique power. Kings sought his counsel, nobles respected his judgment, and ordinary people listened to his sermons with awe. Imagine Bernard hearing rumors of this unusual brotherhood in Jerusalem, a group of knights who lived like monks yet protected travelers with their swords, a fusion of spiritual devotion and military discipline that had never existed in such a form before. The idea intrigued him, and when Hughes de Payens traveled to Europe to seek official recognition from the church, Bernard recognized the potential immediately. The meeting between the humble knight and the revered monk must have been a moment marked by contrast and harmony. Hughes, whether by travel and service, spoke with the honesty of a man who had seen danger firsthand. Bernard listened with the careful attention of someone who understood that faith expressed through action could change the world. Their conversation was likely gentle, thoughtful, and filled with a mutual understanding that something extraordinary was taking shape. Bernard agreed to support the order. His influence was profound enough that when he lent his voice to the cause, the church listened. With Bernard's guidance, the order began crafting a clear rule, a set of principles that defined how they would live, pray, fight, and serve. This rule would become the heart of the order, shaping its conduct for generations. In 1129, during the Council of Troyes, church leaders gathered to hear Hughes present the mission and practices of the Brotherhood. It was a pivotal moment, one filled with quiet anticipation. The future of the order rested on the words of a few knights and the support of influential clergy, yet the sincerity and necessity of their mission shone through. The council recognized them formally as a religious military order, giving birth to what would become known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, soon shortened by the world to the Knights Templar. Imagine the feeling among the knights as this recognition reached them back in Jerusalem. There was no triumphant celebration or loud display of pride. Instead, their joy was a deep, steady warmth, gratitude for the blessing of purpose made official. They remained humble. Their clothing was still simple. Their possessions were still few. But now, they were no longer just a group of devoted men. They were an order acknowledged by both king and church, empowered to continue their mission with guidance, structure, and unity. Their rule emphasized discipline. They were to live without personal wealth, eat simple meals, avoid unnecessary conflict, and serve with absolute loyalty to their cause. The order required obedience, purity of intention, and a willingness to set aside personal ambition for collective devotion. Imagine the quiet halls where they prayed, the dimly lit chambers where they studied scripture, the shared meals eaten in respectful silence. Their lives were not glamorous, but deeply meaningful. This recognition transformed the Templars in more ways than one. It gave them the authority to recruit new members, receive donations, and expand their presence across the Holy Land in Europe. The road that began with 9 humble knights was now opening into something much larger, a path toward influence, wealth, and a legacy that would grow beyond anything they could have imagined. Yet at this early stage, everything still moved slowly, like dawn gently spreading across a sleeping landscape. The knights continued their work on the roads, guarding pilgrims with the same dedication as before. Their fame had not yet spread across the continents. Their symbols were not yet known. Only their devotion had changed, strengthened by recognition, guided by rules, and shaped by a calling that had transformed from a spark into a steady flame. As you imagine them standing together in the warm light of Jerusalem's sunrise, their horses prepared, their swords sheathed, and their hearts focused, you can feel the calm determination that would carry them into the next phase of their journey. The world had begun to notice them, and soon the Templars would rise far beyond their humble origins, becoming one of the most powerful and fascinating orders in medieval history. The Knights Templar, now recognized by both church and crown, stepped into a new chapter of their existence, one defined not by the grandeur the world would later associate with them, but by a quiet and disciplined way of life rooted in humility. To understand the heart of the Templars, imagine waking before dawn in a simple stone chamber, the air cool and still, lit only by the faint blue glow of early morning. A soft breeze brushes through narrow windows, carrying the scent of dust, olive trees, and distant incense. This was the world the Templars built for themselves, a world of order, ritual, and devotion. Their daily life followed a rhythm as steady as breath. Long before the sun climbed above the horizon, the brothers rose from their hard wooden cots. They did not speak upon waking. Silence allowed their minds to settle into prayerful intention. Their clothing, far from decorative, consisted of simple woolen garments, white tunics for knights, brown or black for sergeants, each marked with the unmistakable red cross. The cross was not a symbol of pride but of commitment, a constant reminder that their lives were no longer their own. They belonged to their mission. As they assembled in the dim chapel, candles flickered softly, casting golden halos across the stone walls. The brothers prayed together, their voices blending into a low, soothing chant that echoed gently through the hall. It was not the booming chorus of grand cathedrals, but a quiet murmur, like waves brushing softly against a shore. Each prayer was a grounding moment, aligning their hearts with the vows they had taken: poverty, chastity, and obedience. After prayer, they moved into their routines with calm efficiency. A Templar's life was simple, but simplicity carried its own discipline. Their meals reflected the vow of poverty: bread, vegetables, a bit of cheese, sometimes fish, and only on rare occasions meat. They ate in silence, listening to scripture readings or reflections offered by one of the brothers. Even at mealtime, their minds were guided toward humility and purpose. The act of eating was not indulgence. It was nourishment for service. Imagine them seated at long wooden tables, heads bowed, hands steady, movements deliberate. The light filtering through small windows shifted slowly as the morning passed, creating patterns on the tables and floors like drifting memories. The brothers were not hurried. Everything in their world encouraged a slower pace, steady breaths, steady actions, steady hearts. Their vows shaped every moment. The vow of poverty meant that nothing belonged to them. Not their armor, not their horses, not even the contents of their small chambers. Everything was shared, everything was communal. They owned no personal wealth, and even gifts received from supporters were immediately added to the order's treasury, not kept by any individual. Their armor was practical, their weapons well-maintained but unadorned. The Templars avoided all unnecessary decoration, believing that excess weakened the spirit. Chastity, too, shaped their lives. The world outside their commanderies was full of temptations, distractions, and ordinary human desires. But within the order, their focus remained narrow and disciplined. Their relationships were brotherly, bound by spiritual connection rather than personal attachment. They believed that purity strengthened their mission and kept them aligned with the divine purpose they served. Obedience was perhaps the most defining vow. A Templar's loyalty to the order was absolute. Commands were followed without hesitation, not out of fear but out of trust. Trust in their leaders, trust in their mission, and trust in the guiding principles that shaped their lives. This obedience created unity, allowing the order to function with the smoothness of a single body rather than a cluster of individuals. Outside the chapel and dining hall, the Templars spent much of their time training and preparing. Even in rest, they were guardians. Their days might involve caring for horses, sharpening weapons, maintaining equipment, or practicing formations. But imagine this training not as loud or harsh, but as controlled and mindful. Their movements were purposeful, their teamwork seamless. Every swing of a sword, every adjustment of armor, every step in formation was carried out with a quiet precision. Even their horses received extraordinary care. The Templars understood that their mounts were partners in protection, not tools. Imagine a stable filled with the warm scent of hay and leather, with horses standing calmly as brothers brushed their coats or whispered soothing words to them. The bond between knight and horse was one of mutual trust, formed through long hours of training and gentle attention. Beyond the training grounds, the Templars also carried out practical tasks essential for survival: tending gardens, repairing structures, storing supplies, and managing the simple but necessary operations of their commanderies. Their lives were not filled with constant action. Much of their time was quiet, peaceful, and repetitive, shaped by the same rhythms day after day. But there were moments when the brothers stepped outside the walls of their compounds and onto the dusty roads where pilgrims walked. These were the duties that defined them. Picture two Templars riding side by side, cloaks fluttering behind them, eyes scanning the horizon. They rode not as conquerors, but as protectors, offering reassurance to weary travelers. Their presence alone was often enough to deter would-be attackers. Pilgrims felt safer when they saw the white cloaks and red crosses approaching. In the evenings, when the day's tasks were complete and the horses safely stabled, the brothers returned to prayer. Their voices once again filled the chapel, drifting upward into the shadows of the ceiling. After prayer, they retired to their chambers. The beds were hard, the blankets simple, the walls bare, yet sleep came easily to men whose days were filled with purpose and clarity. A sense of brotherhood held them together, a connection not forged through shared blood, but through shared purpose. Imagine the quiet comfort that came from knowing that every man beside you lived by the same vows, carried the same burdens, and held the same hopes. In a world marked by uncertainty and constant danger, the Templars found strength in unity. Their lifestyle, austere and disciplined, was unlike anything the medieval world had seen before. They were neither monks nor typical knights, but a rare blend of both, warriors of faith who chose simplicity over luxury, duty over desire, and obedience over ambition. Their vows gave them identity, their routines gave them strength, and their devotion gave them purpose. As night settled over their commanderies, the flicker of candles faded, leaving only moonlight brushing across stone floors. The brothers rested, breathing softly, their hearts steady, their minds at peace. Tomorrow would bring the same rhythm, the same duties, the same devotion, and in this repetition they found meaning. In the early years of their existence, the Templars lived quietly, almost unnoticed by the wider world. They worked, prayed, protected, and served with steady humility. But as time passed, something subtle began to shift around them. Like a small flame gaining strength with each breath of air, the reputation of the Templars started to spread, first through the dusty roads of the Holy Land, then across the seas, and eventually throughout the courts and kingdoms of Europe. The order that began with only a handful of devoted knights was now stepping onto a much larger stage, guided by purpose and strengthened by recognition. Imagine Europe hearing whispers of these unusual warriors. Travelers returning from Jerusalem carried stories of the men in white cloaks with red crosses who guarded pilgrims and patrolled dangerous roads without expecting reward. Priests spoke of them from pulpits. Merchants mentioned them at markets. And nobles, always attended to matters of honor and faith, listened closely. Slowly, the Templars became known not just as protectors, but as symbols of discipline, courage, and spiritual dedication. Their reputation was like a quiet river cutting its way across the land, steady, unstoppable, and deeply influential. Donations began to flow toward the order. Some gifts were modest: a small piece of land, a few coins, a horse, a cart, or a set of tools. Other donations were grand: estates offered by wealthy families seeking to support the Holy Land or show allegiance to the Church. But no matter the size, each donation was treated with gratitude and humility. The Templars accepted these offerings not for personal gain, but for strengthening their mission. They owned nothing individually. Everything belonged to the Order. Every bit of support became fuel for a mission that still felt sacred and fragile. Imagine a humble Templar commander receiving a donation in a quiet European village. The donor might be an aging nobleman, inspired by tales of bravery, or a farmer moved by faith. The commander would thank them with sincerity, offering blessings and prayers rather than promises of wealth or status. In this way, bit by bit, the Templars expanded, quietly and organically, like roots spreading beneath the surface of soil. As their resources grew, so did their responsibilities. More pilgrims needed protection, more routes required watching, and more Crusader territories asked for support. The Templars responded by recruiting new brothers, men drawn by devotion, duty, or the desire to serve something greater than themselves. These recruits came from many lands: France, England, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and beyond. Some were experienced knights accustomed to the weight of armor and the discipline of battle. Others were younger, eager to learn, filled with hope and trembling excitement at the thought of joining such a revered brotherhood. Picture the moment a new recruit arrived at a Templar commandery. He would leave behind his old life, his family name, his possessions, his ambitions, and step into a world defined by simplicity and service. The brothers would welcome him not with fanfare, but with gentle guidance. They taught him how to live as a Templar, how to pray, how to care for his equipment, how to serve in silence, how to respect the Order's rules. The recruit's transformation was not sudden, but slow and steady, like a candle gradually becoming brighter in the dark. With more brothers, more horses, more supplies, and more land, the Templars found themselves growing into something few could have predicted. Their military role expanded, and their presence in Europe increased. They established commanderies, small communities where brothers lived, trained, and managed the Order's resources. Some commanderies were simple farmsteads. Others were large estates with workshops, stables, and chapels. These places became the backbone of the Order, supporting the work in the Holy Land with goods, money, and manpower. Imagine walking through one of these commanderies. The air would smell of hay, wood smoke, and earth. Brothers tended gardens, cared for animals, repaired weapons, or studied scriptures. None lived lavishly. Their vows allowed for no indulgence. Yet there was a sense of abundance, not of luxury, but of purpose. Every corner of the commandery hummed with the quiet energy of devotion. Every task, no matter how small, contributed to the larger mission. As they expanded, the Templars also gained new privileges from the Church, powers that set them apart from other knights and even from many religious groups. They were allowed to operate independently of local bishops, answer directly to the Pope, travel freely across borders, and manage their affairs without interference from kings or nobles. These privileges were granted slowly over time, each one strengthening the Order's autonomy and influence. Imagine how extraordinary this must have felt in a world ruled by strict hierarchies. Ordinary knights were bound to lords and kings. Monks were tied to monasteries. But the Templars existed somewhere in between, loyal only to God, the Pope, and their mission. This unique position attracted even more attention and admiration. Their independence gave them credibility. Their discipline gave them respect. With that credibility came responsibility. Kings began seeking their counsel. Merchants sought their protection. Pilgrims placed their trust in them. The Templars became intermediaries, advisors, guardians, and sometimes even diplomats. Their white cloaks became symbols not only of purity but of reliability. A Templar promise was considered unbreakable. Their honesty became legendary. The Order's presence in the Holy Land also grew. They began building fortresses, massive stone strongholds perched across mountains, valleys, and coastal plains. These fortresses were unlike anything Europe had ever seen. formidable, expertly designed, and strategically placed. They served as safe havens for pilgrims, bases for patrols, and shields against enemy forces. Some rose near vital trade routes. Others stood watch over important cities. These structures were not just military installations. They were symbols of stability in a land constantly shifting between peace and conflict. Picture one of these fortresses at dusk, its stone walls glowing in the fading light. A Templar stands on the battlements, scanning the horizon with calm vigilance. Below him, brothers prepare for evening prayers, their figures moving slowly across courtyards lit by torches. The sound of the sea or desert wind washes over the stone, blending with the quiet rhythms of Templar life. The fortress feels both strong and serene, a blend of vigilance and contemplation. As the order continued to grow, its influence stretched across continents. Yet despite their expanding power and resources, the Templars still lived by their original values. They were disciplined, obedient, and unwaveringly committed to their mission. Their rise was not driven by ambition, but by service. Everything they gained, land, respect, authority, came from the trust they earned through action, humility, and integrity. The transformation of the Templars from a small group of protectors into a powerful medieval force did not happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, like a long sunrise brightening the world inch by inch. And though they had risen far beyond their humble origins, at the heart of the order there remained a simple truth. They existed to protect, to serve, and to bring safety to those who had none. As night settles once more over the Holy Land and across the distant commanderies of Europe, the Templars rest in the knowledge that their mission is growing, their fame is spreading, their responsibilities are multiplying, but their purpose remains unchanged. The world is beginning to see them not just as knights, but as guardians shaped by faith, discipline, and quiet strength. As the Templars grew in strength, recognition, and unity, their presence in the Holy Land became not only valuable but essential. The Crusader states, Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, and Edessa, were scattered across a region full of breathtaking landscapes and unpredictable dangers. These states were like islands in a vast sea of shifting alliances, powerful neighbors, and unfamiliar terrain. And at the heart of these fragile territories stood the Templars, serving as quiet guardians of a land that held sacred meaning for millions. To understand their role here, imagine the Holy Land as it might have looked in the 12th century. The sun rises slowly over the desert, spreading warm gold across the horizon. Palm trees sway gently in the morning breeze. The scent of sand, stone, and distant water fills the air. Caravans move along dirt roads, their camels swaying with rhythmic patience. Farmers tend their crops near hidden springs, and fishermen prepare nets along the coast. It is a land full of life, beauty, and history, but also one that carried constant tension as rival powers watched and waited for opportunities. Into this landscape, the Templars rode with calm precision. Their responsibilities had expanded far beyond protecting pilgrims. They were now stationed at key strongholds, watching over trade routes and supporting the armies of the Crusader states. But unlike other soldiers, they carried no personal ambition. Their loyalty was not to individual kings or nobles, but to their order and the land they had promised to defend. Imagine a typical morning at a Templar outpost near the borders of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The air is cool and fresh, the sun just beginning to warm the earth. Templar brothers move with purpose. Even at this hour, there is no rush, no loud calling of orders, only quiet discipline. Some prepare their horses for patrol, brushing their coats, adjusting saddles, and ensuring every strap is secure. Others check supplies, inspect weapons, or walk along the walls of the fortress, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. Their white cloaks flutter softly in the breeze, a peaceful contrast to the harshness of the landscape. Their presence alone brings reassurance. They have become a symbol of stability in a region where safety can change from day to day. Pilgrims traveling the roads feel a sense of comfort when they see Templars stationed near mountain passes or river crossings. Merchants breathe easier knowing that Templar patrols often travel the same routes they rely on for trade. But the Templars were not merely patrolling the land. They were learning it. They studied the terrain with the careful attention of men who understood that survival depended on knowledge. They learned where the roads narrowed into dangerous bottlenecks, where hidden paths snaked through valleys, where water could be found in the driest months, and where rival forces prefer to travel. They learn the behavior of the land, its seasons, its winds, its silent warnings. This understanding became one of their greatest strengths. The Crusader armies relied on the Templars for more than just military might. They looked to them for strategy, information, and leadership. The Templars had earned a reputation for steadfastness. They did not falter in battle, nor did they retreat unless absolutely necessary. Their discipline made them invaluable during sieges, patrols, and military campaigns. Yet even in battle, they adhered to their rules, acting not from rage or ambition, but from duty. Still, it is important to remember that much of their life in the Holy Land was not spent in conflict, but in quiet vigilance. Imagine a Templar patrol riding along the dry stretches between Jerusalem and the Jordan River. The heat of the day rises, shimmering across the sand. The horses move steadily, their hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. The brothers ride in silence, each one scanning the landscape with calm, experienced eyes. Their presence discourages attacks. In many cases, the mere sight of Templar riders causes would-be ambushers to fade back into the hills. At night, the patrol might stop near an oasis or rest beside a small cluster of palm trees. They water their horses, share a simple meal, and pray together under the stars. The Holy Land at night is quiet, not silent, but filled with the gentle sound of insects, distant wind, and sometimes the cries of night birds. The Templars sit in a circle, their white cloaks glowing softly in the moonlight, speaking in low voices about their patrols and their hopes for the coming days. Fortresses played a crucial role in the Templars' presence. Some were perched on mountain tops with sweeping views across valleys. Others stood near coastlines, watching the horizon for approaching ships. Inside these strongholds, life followed a steady rhythm. Brothers cared for weapons, studied maps, tended gardens, and trained for emergencies. Every fortress felt like a small world within itself, a blend of military efficiency and monastic calm. Imagine stepping inside one of these Templar strongholds on a warm afternoon. The thick stone walls keep the interior cool. Brothers walk through corridors lit by narrow slits of sunlight. The distant clatter of blacksmiths rings softly through the courtyard as they forge horseshoes, repair armor, or adjust the blades of swords. In another part of the fortress, a group of brothers sits quietly, listening to the soft voice of one reading scripture. The sounds mingle into a peaceful hum, steady, calm, purposeful. Beyond patrols and fortresses, the Templars also played a crucial role in supporting pilgrims who wished to visit the holy sites of Jerusalem. They guided groups through dangerous regions, offered shelter at their outposts, and provided food and water for those too weak to continue. Many pilgrims who returned home spoke of the kindness and protection offered by the Templars. These stories traveled far, shaping the order's reputation across Europe. Yet the Templars' relationship with the Holy Land was deeper than duty. It was spiritual. They believed the land they protected was sacred, that their work was part of divine calling. This belief gave them strength in difficult times. It gave them purpose when danger felt overwhelming. It gave them peace even on the harshest days. As you imagine them standing along the ancient walls of Jerusalem, the city stretching below them in golden light, you can sense the weight of their devotion. They were not just soldiers. They were not just monks. They were something in between, guardians of a land that held immeasurable meaning for countless people. Their presence in the Holy Land was not a brief chapter. It was a long, steady, deeply rooted commitment that shaped the identity of the order and the history of the region. Years turned into decades, and the Templars continued their work with the same quiet discipline that had carried them from their earliest days. They watched, learned, protected, and served, always calm, always steady, always guided by a purpose that had grown as vast as the land itself. When night fell over their fortresses and the stars emerged like scattered jewels across the sky, the Templars settled into rest knowing that tomorrow would bring the same responsibilities, the same quiet rides, the same watchful moments, the same humble service. Their role in the Holy Land was far from over, and the world would soon come to see just how deeply intertwined the Templars had become with the land they vowed to defend. Across the Holy Land, scattered like silent guardians of stone, stood the castles and strongholds the Templars built or inherited. mighty structures that shaped their identity and protected countless lives. These fortresses were more than military posts. They were sanctuaries, symbols, and lifelines. They rose from desert cliffs, coastal shores, rocky plateaus, and fertile valleys, each one bearing the unmistakable imprint of the Templar discipline. To imagine their world is to stand within these walls and feel their quiet strength. Picture the landscape at dawn. The first light touches the battlements of a massive fortress perched high on a hill. Its stone blocks glow softly under the rising sun, still cool from the night air. Below, winding paths stretch like threads across the earth, connecting villages, rivers, and the distant glimmer of the sea. This fortress, like many the Templars built, was placed in a location chosen not for beauty, but for strategy. From here, the brothers could see far. Every approach, every curve of the land, every flicker of movement. The world below them unfolded like a vast map. One of the most remarkable strongholds associated with the Templars was the fortress of Tortosa, situated near the Mediterranean coast. Imagine its towers rising above the shoreline, the waves crashing softly against the rocks below. The scent of salt carried on the wind mingled with the earthy smell of the stone. Inside the fortress, life was steady and purposeful. Brothers tended their horses, prepared meals in small kitchens, and practiced their routines in wide courtyards. The sea's constant rhythm created a soothing backdrop, a reminder how connected they were to both land and water. Another iconic stronghold was the great fortress of Safed, perched high in the hills of Galilee. It overlooked vast stretches of land, giving the Templars a vantage point unmatched by other forces. The climb up the Safe was steep and winding, but once inside, a visitor would have felt the calm and order that defined Templar life. The rooms were simple, the hallways broad, and the courtyards open to allow fresh breezes to flow through. Standing on its walls, a Templar could look out and see mountains fading into the distance, valleys dotted with settlements, and the ancient world spread before him like a living scroll. Perhaps the most famous of all Templar fortresses was the mighty Croc de Chevaliers, one of the greatest castles in medieval history. Imagine approaching from a distance, a massive structure rising from a hilltop, surrounded by deep valleys and winding roads. Its walls were thick, its towers high, and its layers of defense carefully designed. Yet even here, amid such impressive architecture, the Templars lived with humility. Their halls were not filled with luxury. Their rooms were bare, their furnishings minimal. Even in one of the most powerful fortresses ever built, the brothers maintained the simplicity of their vows. Inside these castles, daily life had its own rhythm. In the early morning, the brothers gathered for prayer in small chapels lit by narrow windows. Their voices rose softly, echoing through the stone walls. After prayer came the tasks of the day. Some maintained the armory, ensuring that swords, shields, and chain mail were ready for use. Others cared for the horses, brushing their coats until they shone and feeding them fresh grain. Still others patrolled the outer walls, scanning the landscape with steady, patient eyes. The Templars understood that strength came not only from walls and weapons, but from the organization and discipline that shaped every corner of their strongholds. They built storerooms deep within the castles, filled with grain, dried fruit, oil, and salted meat, enough to withstand long sieges. Wells were dug inside the walls to provide water even when the castle was surrounded. Workshops produced tools, armor, and supplies. Everything had its place, and everything served a purpose. Imagine walking through one of their corridors during the midday heat. The stone keeps the air cool, providing relief from the sun outside. A faint breeze moves through the narrow windows, carrying the scent of distant pine and warm earth. In the courtyard, a few brothers practice maneuvers, their movements slow and controlled, mindful of the heat. Others prepare meals, simple dishes cooking over low flames, filling the air with gentle aromas of herbs and bread. The life inside these walls was peaceful, ordered, and steady. At night, the strongholds transformed into islands of light in a sea of darkness. Torches flickered along the battlements. The stars glittered above, brighter and clearer than in cities of Europe. From the top of a Templar tower, one could look out across the land and see nothing but shadows and moonlit hills. The world felt vast and silent. Brothers on watch moved quietly along the walls, keeping their eyes open while the rest of Commandery rested. The calm of the night was soothing, a reminder that even in a land known for conflict, peace could be found within these walls. These fortresses were more than defensive structures. They were homes. They sheltered Templars who had traveled from distant lands, brothers who had left families, wealth, and comfort behind. Within these walls, they found community. They shared meals, prayers, duties, and moments of stillness. The stone halls witnessed countless conversations, confessions, hopes, and fears. In these places, the Templars forged bonds stronger than steel. The castles also served as sanctuaries for travelers. Pilgrims who sought shelter would find safety within the walls, welcomed with kindness and offered food and water. Merchants passing through dangerous regions often rested in Templar strongholds, knowing they were protected by men sworn to honesty and service. Even local villagers sometimes sought refuge during times of danger, trusting the strength and fairness of the order. The architecture of these fortresses reflected the Templar spirit. They were not adorned with carvings or lavish decorations. Their beauty came from their strength, their symmetry, and their purpose. Wide courtyards allowed for training and gatherings. Thick walls provided safety. High towers offered visibility. Every stone was placed with intention, every corner designed to serve the Order's mission. Imagine standing at the edge of a Templar fortress at sunset. The sky glows with soft hues of orange, pink, and gold. Birds circle above the walls, calling out as they settle for the night. A gentle wind passes through the battlements. Below, the land stretches into fading light. A mixture of valleys, fields, and distant mountains blurred by the glow. The world feels ancient, serene, and grounded. And at that moment, the fortress seems not just a structure of stone, but a living guardian, watching over the land with the same steady silence as the brothers who inhabit it. Through these strongholds, the Templars anchored their presence in the Holy Land. Each fortress was a testament to their dedication, a blend of strength and serenity, vigilance and peace. These places were where the Templars lived, trained, prayed, protected, and found purpose. They were the silent witnesses to countless moments of bravery, reflection, and devotion. As the Templars' presence spread across the Holy Land and into Europe, a new chapter in their story began. One that unfolded not on dusty roads or fortress battlements, but in the quiet exchanges of coins, letters, and promises. It was a chapter that revealed a different kind of strength, one rooted not in the sword but in trust. This strength emerged slowly, shaped by necessity and opportunity, and would eventually make the Templars one of the most influential financial forces of the medieval world. Imagine a pilgrim preparing for the long journey to Jerusalem. He stands in a small stone room somewhere in France or England, packing his meager belongings. A cloak, a simple satchel, a few tools, and the little money he has saved. But as he looks at the coins in his hand, he feels a familiar fear. Thieves haunt the long roads. Bandits lie in wait along narrow passes. Carrying gold invites danger. Many pilgrims lost everything before they ever saw the holy city. It was to solve this problem that the Templars, and the Templars alone, offered a quiet miracle of security. They created a system that allowed pilgrims to deposit money in their home country and receive a written note that could be exchanged later in the Holy Land. It was simple in principle but revolutionary in practice. No longer did travelers need to carry heavy coins across hostile territories. They carried only a letter, a promise, knowing the Templars would honor it thousands of miles away. Imagine stepping into a Templar commandery in Paris or London. The room is calm, lit by soft afternoon light, filtering through narrow windows. A Templar clerk sits at a table covered with parchment, ink pots, and neatly arranged ledgers. The pilgrim approaches nervously, unsure if he can trust such a system. But the Templar's voice is steady and reassuring, each word measured, each gesture humble. There is nothing flashy or prideful about the process, only quiet professionalism. The pilgrim hands over his coins. The Templar writes a coded document, symbols and words only brothers of the order can decipher. This note is sealed with wax and handed back to the pilgrim, who tucks it into his travel sack. When the pilgrim later reaches Jerusalem, he visits a Templar house there, presents a letter, and receives the equivalent amount in local currency. The process is smooth, peaceful, and astonishingly ahead of its time. The Templars had inadvertently created one of the earliest forms of banking, safe, reliable, and trusted across borders. Their reputation for honesty made the system possible. People believed in them. Kings, nobles, merchants, and pilgrims all knew that a Templar promise was as solid as a fortress wall. If the red cross appeared on a document, it meant something. It meant safety. The Templars' financial role expanded naturally from this trust. As donations poured into the order, they needed efficient ways to manage and distribute resources across continents. They developed a network of treasuries, each managed with strict discipline. Ledgers were kept meticulously, sometimes in code, documenting every coin given, spent, or transferred. The brothers who handled finances lived with the same simplicity and humility as those who rode into battle. Their work was quiet but essential, a form of service just as meaningful as guarding travelers on dusty roads. Imagine a group of Templar clerks working late into the evening, candles casting warm circles of light around them, their quills scratched softly against parchment. Outside, the night settles over commandery, but inside, the careful work continues. Their calculations are precise, their records exact. They know that mistakes can endanger missions, disrupt supplies, or damage the trust so carefully built. As kings began to recognize the Templars' organizational skills, they turned to the order for financial help. The Templars lent money to rulers who needed funds for campaigns or governance. They managed treasuries for nobles who trusted no one else. Some monarchs even stored their riches inside Templar strongholds, believing the order's vaults were safer than their own castles. Imagine a royal emissary arriving at a Templar commandery carrying a chest of gold. The journey was tense, guarded by soldiers who feared what could happen if the treasure fell into the wrong hands. But once inside the Templar walls, the tension eased. Brothers inspected the chest with calm eyes, recorded every coin, and stored it in secure rooms deep within the fortress. The emissary left with a sense of relief, knowing the treasure was guarded not only by stone walls, but by the integrity of men who had sworn to protect wealth that was not their own. The Templars also facilitated large-scale trade and travel. Merchants used their network to transfer money across borders. Nobles used it to fund estates far from home. The order even acted as intermediaries in political agreements, holding deposits as guarantees of peace or loyalty. Their influence grew quietly, rooted in efficiency and trust rather than power or wealth. But even as their financial system expanded, the Templars remained devoted to simplicity. They did not live in luxury. They did not hoard riches for themselves. Everything they controlled served a mission, defending the Holy Land, protecting pilgrims, and sustaining brothers stationed far from home. Their vaults and treasuries were tools, not treasures. Imagine visiting a Templar treasury inside a fortress. The room is cool, carved from thick stone. Heavy chests line the walls, each secured with iron locks. Brothers move carefully, lifting lids, checking seals, recording details in their ledgers. The atmosphere is calm, orderly, almost reverent. Wealth here is not an indulgence. It is a responsibility. The Templars guard it with the same seriousness with which they wield their swords. Their approach to money transformed the medieval world. They helped stabilize economies, supported kingdoms, and created systems that allowed safe travel across dangerous lands. Their letters of credit inspired later banking innovations. Their disciplined management of resources set new standards of trust and reliability. Yet despite all this, the Templars remained grounded in their vows. Their financial influence never replaced their spiritual mission. They prayed each morning and night. They lived simply, ate modestly, and trained rigorously. Their wealth belonged to the order, not to individuals. Even the men who handled vast sums of money owned nothing of their own. Their commitment to poverty made them paradoxically powerful, untouched by greed, untempted by personal gain. As night falls over their commanderies and strongholds, you can imagine the treasuries locked and silent, the ledgers closed, the candles extinguished. The brothers sleep with steady breaths, knowing that the simplicity of their vows allows them to wield influence without being consumed by it. Their financial role is merely another way they serve, another way they bring safety and stability to a world that often feels uncertain. Across Europe, the presence of the Templars began to take on a life of its own. What started as a small number of houses and estates gradually grew into a vast network that stretched across kingdoms, rivers, mountains, and seas. This network formed the quiet backbone of the entire order, providing food, supplies, horses, equipment, and financial support for brothers stationed far away in the Holy Land. But it also created something deeper, an invisible thread connecting distant lands, cultures, and people through the steady, dependable work of the Templars. Imagine Europe during this time. Rolling green hills dotted with sheep, forests thick with oaks and pines, villages centered around stone churches, castles rising from cliffs and hilltops, market squares filled with the sounds of vendors calling out and the smell of baked bread drifting through narrow streets. Into this world, the Templars wove themselves quietly, without imposing, without seeking attention. Their commanderies were often built on peaceful stretches of land, farms, fields, forests, and vineyards that provided steady support for the Order's mission. Picture a Templar commandery in rural France at dawn. Mist clings to the fields, softening the outlines of everything. The roosters begin their calls, echoing across the countryside. Brothers in simple woolen robes move calmly through the morning light, beginning their prayers. The world is peaceful here. There are no battle cries, no desert winds sweeping across stone. Instead, there is dew on the grass, the scent of fresh soil, and the quiet rustling of leaves. Yet even in this serene setting, every task carried meaning. The Templars were skilled land managers. They maintained orchards, grew crops, raised cattle, produced wine, and managed mills. Their farms were not grand or luxurious, but efficient and well-organized. They worked alongside hired laborers from nearby villages, offering fair wages and steady employment in an era where security was rare. Because of their discipline and order, Templar estates became known for their productivity and stability. Imagine walking through a Templar vineyard on a warm afternoon. Rows of grapevines stretch out in perfect symmetry. The air is filled with the sweet scent of ripening fruit. Brothers move between the rows, checking the leaves, tending to the plants, ensuring everything grows as it should. They work in silence or speak in soft tones, their movements deliberate and peaceful. The land responds to their care. It flourishes. These commanderies were more than farms. They were homes. Many brothers who served in Europe were older or recovering from injuries. Some had once ridden the plains of the Holy Land, and now found themselves waking to the gentle sounds of countryside life. There was healing in the simplicity of it. They prayed, worked, studied, and lived with the same discipline as those in the East. But their days were filled with the rhythms of nature rather than the demands of battle. In England, the Templars built houses in London, York, Bristol, and smaller villages in between. Their London temple became especially well known, a bustling center that housed their treasury, administrative offices, and lodging for travelers. Imagine entering the round church of the temple in London. Sunlight streams through tall windows, illuminating stone pillars and casting soft reflections onto the floor. The building feels ancient, calm, and sacred. Here, knights prayed before departing for the Holy Land. Here, officials made decisions, and maintained the order's affairs with steady hands. In Spain and Portugal, the Templars supported the Christian kingdoms fighting to reclaim territory from Moorish rule. Their commanderies here were often strong and fortified, blending military readiness with agricultural sustainability. Brothers guarded border regions, protected small towns, and worked long days in vineyards and fields to help fuel the Reconquista. Imagine a Templar riding along the hills of Portugal, the wind cool and fresh, the ocean visible in the distance. His horse moves steadily beneath him as he surveys the land he is sworn to protect. Land filled with both conflict and hope. Across Germany, Italy, and Hungary, Templar houses offered shelter to travelers. When merchants needed safe places to spend the night, they often turned to Templar commanderies. Pilgrims making their way to Rome or Santiago de Compostela found rest and food behind Templar walls. Sometimes the brothers offered medical assistance, simple remedies, herbal treatments, or clean water for sick travelers. These acts of kindness spread the order's reputation further, weaving respect into every region they touched. Every commandery was a world of its own. Some were small, just a handful of brothers living in a modest stone house near a village. Others were large estates with barns, granaries, stables, workshops, and chapels. But whether large or small, each commandery followed the same rules, the same routines, the same principles of simplicity and service. This unity made the Templars stand out in a world where most soldiers and monks lived very differently. Imagine entering a Templar dining hall in Spain. The room is long and modestly furnished. Brothers sit side by side at wooden tables, eating simple meals while one reads from sacred texts. The candles flicker softly, casting gentle shadows on the walls. Outside, the sun sets over fields, orchards, and stone terraces built into the hills. The world feels grounded, steady, timeless. In the evenings, the sound of prayer rises from chapels across Europe, soft murmurs blending into the night air. These prayers connected brothers in France with those in Jerusalem, linking distant lands through quiet devotion. The Templars were spread far apart, yet spiritually they felt close, bound by shared values and shared purpose. Their network across Europe created something the world had rarely seen before, a unified international organization that operated with efficiency, trust, and discipline. Goods flowed from farms to ports, from ports to ships, from ships to fortresses in the Holy Land. Information traveled through letters carried by trusted messengers. Resources shifted from one region to another with seamless coordination. It was an early glimpse of global structure long before such systems were common. And yet, despite their reach, the Templars kept their lives simple. They owned nothing personally. Their beds were plain, their meals humble, their clothing unadorned. In France, in Spain, in England, in Portugal, no matter where they lived, they followed the same rules. Their unity was not based on culture or language, but on devotion. As night blankets Europe, the Templar commanderies settle into silence. The fields rest beneath the stars. The winds soften. Brothers sit in quiet reflection or lie in their cots, their breathing calm and steady. In each house, near or far, the quiet strength of the order remains the same. A strength built not only on fortresses and swords, but on the quiet, reliable, everyday work that sustained the faraway mission in the Holy Land. As the years passed and the Templars grew in power, influence, and devotion, something else began to form around them, something far less tangible than forts, farms, or armies. It was a whispering mist of myth, mystery, and legend that slowly wrapped itself around the order like a cloak. Some of these stories were born from truth. Others emerged from fear, fascination, or the simple human desire to explain what felt extraordinary. Over time, these legends became inseparable from the Templar identity, drifting through villages and courts, carried across continents on the tongues of merchants, pilgrims, and wandering storytellers. Imagine a dark tavern in medieval Europe, lit only by the soft flicker of candles. A group of travelers gather close as a storyteller leans in, lowering his voice. He speaks of a secret brotherhood who guards sacred relics. He describes hidden chambers beneath ancient temples and whispers of treasures so holy that only the purest knights may touch them. The listeners' eyes widen, their imaginations stirred. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, making the story feel even more alive. And so another myth is born, not because the speaker is proof, but because the idea of the Templars invites wonder. At the center of many such stories were the relics the Templars were believed to protect. Some said they guarded fragments of the true cross, the very wood upon which Christ was crucified. Others insisted they possessed the Holy Lance, the spear said to have pierced Jesus' side. But perhaps the most famous of all the relics whispered about was a Holy Grail, an object soaked in mystery, meaning different things in different lands. Some believed it was a cup used by Christ at the Last Supper. Others thought it was a stone, a symbol, or a vessel of divine knowledge. And in so many tales, it was the Templars who guarded it, hidden deep within their unreachable strongholds. Imagine a hidden chamber beneath a Templar fortress. The walls are cold stone. Torches flicker softly. A group of brothers kneel before a small altar where a mysterious object rests, wrapped in cloth. The story is cinematic, dramatic, and irresistible. Yet in truth, the Templars rarely spoke of relics publicly, and what they actually held remains blurred by time and rumor. But the silence only fueled the stories. The less the Templars said, the more people imagined. Another legend tied to the order involves the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest said to contain the tablets of the Ten Commandments. Some believe the Templars found the Ark beneath the ruins of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the very place they once called home. They imagined Templar knights descending into ancient tunnels, discovering treasures long lost to history. Whether such a discovery ever occurred remains unknown, but the idea lingered in the minds of storytellers for centuries. The Templars' connection to the Temple Mount itself added fuel to legends. That place was steeped in history and holiness. The Temple of Solomon, though long gone, remained a symbol of ancient wisdom, power, and divine presence. The idea that the Templars lived and trained on such sacred ground gave rise to theories that they uncovered hidden knowledge, scrolls, artifacts, or secret teachings. These tales drifted into Europe, carried by pilgrims and merchants who had visited Jerusalem. Some stories grew quietly among scholars. Others blossomed wildly in the imaginations of villagers sitting around evening fires. But the legends were not only about relics. Some whispered that the Templars knew hidden rituals or possessed esoteric wisdom. These stories painted the order as something more than warriors, something mystical, almost otherworldly. It wasn't uncommon for medieval people to believe in hidden signs, secret codes, and mysteries of the divine. The Templars, with their secrecy, discipline, and immense influence, became the perfect subjects for such fantasies. Imagine the scene of a nighttime ceremony as told in legend. A circle of knights standing beneath the moon, chanting prayers older than memory, their white cloaks glowing softly in the silver light. It sounds magical, ethereal. Yet the real Templars simply prayed in their chapels, repeating the same psalms and scriptures known by countless monks. But a story, once set free, often grows larger than its truth. Even their success in battle contributed to the myths. People wonder how such a small group of knights could stand firm against overwhelming odds, remain calm in the face of danger, and hold ground when others faltered. Some said it was discipline. Others said it was divine intervention. But in the minds of the curious, whispers turned into tales of supernatural protection, angels guarding Templar armies, or miracles occurring on the battlefield. The reality was simpler: training, unity, faith, and years of preparation. Yet the extraordinary always invites imagination. The very symbol of the Templars, the Red Cross, also became a source of fascination. It represented sacrifice, purity, and martyrdom. But for many, it took on other meanings, becoming a mark of mystery. Some believed the cross had secret numerology. Others thought it connected to older traditions, blending Christian devotion with ancient wisdom. These interpretations had little foundation in historical fact. But myths rarely need facts to survive. They live because they satisfy a longing for wonder. The Templars were aware of the stories that surrounded them, but they rarely commented. Silence was their strength, and secrecy their shield. They were not storytellers. They were servants of discipline. Yet with every quiet deed, every closed door, every vow of silence, the legends grew louder. Imagine a young child in medieval France, sitting beside his grandmother as she tells him stories of the Templars. She describes tall knights riding gleaming horses, carrying sacred treasures and protecting holy truths. The child listens with wide eyes, imagining the knights as heroes of myth rather than ordinary men. These stories pass from generation to generation, weaving themselves into the fabric of European culture. Through these tales, the Templars became larger than life. Not because they sought fame, but because mystery invites imagination. A secret order, a sacred mission, ancient relics, forgotten temples, hidden chambers. These elements blend into something enchanting, something people want to believe. Yet within the heart of every myth lies a small spark of truth. The Templars were disciplined. They were devoted. They did protect relics entrusted to them. They did live on sacred ground. They did uncover ancient ruins. They did build vaults and chambers beneath their structures. They did operate in secrecy for safety and survival. And so the legends grew from seeds of reality, nourished by curiosity and shaped by time. As night folds itself gently across the medieval world, imagine these stories drifting through the air like soft smoke. In taverns, courts, monasteries, and markets, the Templars' mythic identity grows with each telling. Their real deeds find companions in imagined ones. Their silence becomes a perfect canvas for wonder. And soon, truth and legend intertwine so completely that they become inseparable. As the decades passed, the Templars continued to stand strong across Europe and the Holy Land, trusted by kings, admired by pilgrims, and respected on the battlefield. Yet even the mightiest structures gather hairline cracks long before anyone notices them. And so it was with the Templars. Their decline did not begin with a dramatic event. It began quietly, like a faint tremor in the distance, small enough to ignore, but strong enough to signal that the ground was shifting. The Holy Land, once the heart of their mission, was changing. The cities and Crusader states the Templars had sworn to protect were no longer secure. The surrounding Muslim powers, strong, organized, and determined, began reclaiming territory piece by piece. At first, these losses seemed temporary, unfortunate setbacks that could be recovered. But slowly, steadily, the Templars watched the world around them transform. Imagine standing on the walls of a Templar fortress as the sun sets over the distant hills. The sky glows gold, the air grows cooler, and the brothers gather for evening prayer. Everything feels peaceful. Yet beneath this calm, an uneasy truth lingers. Each fortress that once kept the Crusader state safe now feels slightly more isolated, slightly more vulnerable. The roads that once bustled with pilgrims begin to grow emptier. Caravans pass less frequently. Letters from Europe become more cautious. Messages from nearby cities speak of growing tensions, new enemies, shifting alliances. These early signs were soft but steady, like the first whispers of a storm still far away. The Templars themselves felt the change in their daily routines. Patrols grew longer. Supplies became harder to secure. The fortresses that once felt invincible now required constant vigilance. Brothers trained with renewed discipline, not out of fear, but out of understanding. They knew the land was becoming more dangerous, more uncertain. Even familiar winds that swept across the desert seemed to carry warnings. Inside their commanderies, conversations grew more serious. The older brothers, those who had served for decades, recognized a pattern. They had witnessed wars rise and fall, seen cities change hands, felt the pulse of the Holy Land shift many times. But now, there was something different in the air. The Crusader states were becoming harder to maintain. Forces were stretched thin. Reinforcements from Europe were fewer. Funding grew inconsistent. The world was beginning to turn its attention elsewhere. Meanwhile, in Europe itself, another kind of change was unfolding. One that had nothing to do with battlefields and everything to do with politics. Kings and nobles who once admired the Templars began to view their power with suspicion. The Order's independence, once celebrated, now seemed threatening to rulers who wished to strengthen their own authority. The Templars were answerable only to the Pope, not to kings. They owned land in many kingdoms, yet paid no taxes. They had strong armies, secure fortresses, and vast networks. To some, this made them saviors. To others, it made them competitors. Imagine a royal council chamber in France or England. Torches flicker along the walls, casting shifting shadows across faces deep in thought. Advisors discuss matters of wealth, alliances, and influence. And somewhere in the conversation, the Templars are mentioned, quietly at first, then with sharper tones. Their land is valuable, their resources vast, their loyalty uncontrollable. Kings who once relied on the Templars begin to wonder what might happen if the Order ever opposed them. And in a world governed by fear and ambition, even a hint of potential danger is enough to plant seeds of distrust. Slowly, rumors begin to spread, nothing dramatic, just murmurs in markets and whispers in taverns. People wonder why the Templars remain so secretive. They question the rituals of the Order, the wealth they manage, the privileges they hold. Gossip, like a gentle but persistent breeze, begins to shift public perception. Stories that were once filled with admiration now begin to include doubt and confusion. The Muslim chroniclers of the region also viewed the Order with a mixture of respect and suspicion. The Templars were formidable enemies, disciplined and difficult to defeat. When diplomats discussed peace or truce, the Templars were often portrayed as obstacles, not because they were unreasonable, but because they were steadfast. Their very dedication, once their greatest strength, became something others blamed when negotiations grew tense. As the geopolitical landscape shifted further, cracks began to appear even within the Crusader states themselves. Different Christian factions argued over leadership, territory, and strategy. The Templars sometimes found themselves caught between political rivalries, forced to choose sides, or remain neutral in ways that only deepened tensions. Their once clear mission, protect pilgrims, and defend the Holy Land became harder to define in a region where the lines between friend and enemy blurred. Imagine a Templar commander looking out over a once thriving city now nearly empty. Markets are quieter. The roads no longer hum with the footsteps of pilgrims. The fields produce less food. The wells need repair. The sense of purpose that once radiated to the region feels thinner, stretched like a fading tapestry. The commander understands the truth. The Holy Land is slipping away, and with it, the very foundation of the Templars' existence. And yet, the brothers continue their work with calm determination. They repair walls. They patrol roads. They pray. They serve. They refuse to abandon their mission, even as the world around them slowly moves toward a new reality. Their discipline remains steady, like the beat of a drum before the dawn. But even the strongest rhythm cannot stop the shifting of an era. Years pass. Tensions grow. The Templars remain dedicated, but the land they protect becomes more fragile each day. Villages empty. Fortresses become isolated. Allies become distant. And though the brothers do their best to adapt, the world beyond their walls is changing too quickly. Far away in Europe, kings tighten their control. The church faces internal struggles. Political ambitions rise like dark clouds. And somewhere within these changing winds, the first faint outlines of the Templars' future troubles begin to form. Still distant, still blurred, but undeniably present. The slow turning of fortune has begun. And though the brothers cannot see the full shape of what lies ahead, they feel its presence. Soft as a shadow, quiet as a whisper, steady as footsteps approaching from far away. The fall of Jerusalem was not a sudden event, nor was it a moment marked by a single cry across the land. It was a long, quiet unraveling, one that the Templars felt in their bones long before the world truly understood what was happening. The Holy Land had always been a place of shifting sands, fragile alliances, and uncertain peace. But as the years passed, the balance that once favored the Crusader states tilted gently, then sharply toward collapse. Imagine a warm morning in Jerusalem. The city glows beneath the rising sun, its golden stone walls reflecting light like a beacon. Pilgrims walk through narrow streets. Merchants open their stalls, and the distant sound of church bells mingles with the call to prayer from nearby Muslim neighborhoods. For centuries, Jerusalem had been a mosaic of cultures and faiths, a place where hope and tension existed side by side. Inside the city, the Templars maintained their disciplined routines. They patrolled the gates, guarded key routes, and watched over the sacred sites entrusted to them. Their presence was familiar to people. Steady, protective, dependable. And yet, even as they carried out their duties, a subtle heaviness lingered in the air, like dust settling slowly after a distant storm. Beyond Jerusalem's walls, a powerful leader had risen in the Muslim world. Salah ad-Din, known in the West as Saladin, a man of great intelligence, patience, and honor. He unified regions that had once been divided. His leadership created a force far stronger than any the Crusader states had faced in many years. And while the Templars respected strength wherever they saw it, they also understood that Saladin's rise signaled a future filled with challenges. The first warning signs appeared like faint ripples across water. Small towns changed hands. Trade routes that once felt safe grew uncertain. Messages arrived at Templar commanderies describing shifting loyalties and growing armies. At first, the brothers hoped these were temporary changes, storms that would pass. But deep inside, they knew the land was moving beneath their feet. Then came the Great Battle of Aten in 1187, a turning point so profound that its echoes would be felt for generations. The Templars marched into the battle with unwavering discipline, their white cloaks bright under the harsh sun. But the day was merciless. The heat was unbearable, water was scarce, and Saladin's forces surrounded the Crusader army with precision and patience. Many brothers fought until their strength faded, refusing to abandon their vows. Those who survived were taken captive. Some were executed. Others were imprisoned. The Templars had endured hardship before, but Aten was unlike anything they had experienced. It shattered the military strength of the Crusader states. It left cities defenseless. It opened a path to Jerusalem. Imagine the news arriving in Jerusalem. Messengers rode hard through the night, dust covering their cloaks, fear tightening their voices. When the gates opened for them, their words spread through the city like a cold wind. The Crusader army was gone. The Templars who had held the line were lost or scattered. The walls of Jerusalem suddenly felt thin, too thin for the weight they were meant to bear. The people of Jerusalem braced themselves. Some prayed, some wept, others fortified the walls. The Templars did what they always did. They prepared calmly, quietly, with unwavering resolve. They knew Saladin was coming. They knew the outcome was uncertain. And they knew their duty remained the same, even if the city fell. When Saladin approached Jerusalem, he did not come with reckless destruction. He came with strategy and honor. Negotiations began, and though the terms were difficult, they allowed many Christians to leave the city safely after paying ransom. The Templars, however, faced harsher choices. They stayed as long as they could, guarding refugees, helping families escape, and organizing the remnants of the defense. Then, at last, Jerusalem surrendered, not with flames or chaos, but with solemn acceptance. The Templars left the city they had guarded for decades, their steps heavy, their hearts burdened, yet their resolve unbroken. The holy city, the center of their mission, was no longer theirs to protect. In the years that followed, the Templars faced a new reality. Their headquarters shifted to other strongholds. Their focus moved to defending coastal cities like Tyre and Acre. But the loss of Jerusalem left a silent ache, a wound that never fully healed. The Holy Land was changing, and the Templars were forced to change with it. Acre became their new center of power. It was a bustling port city filled with merchants, travelers, and soldiers. The sea whispered constantly against the shore, carrying news, hope, and danger from distant lands. The Templars built strongholds here, trained new recruits, managed supplies, and worked tirelessly to preserve what remained of the Crusader states. But even as they strengthened Acre, they knew the foundation beneath them was fragile. Years passed. Conflicts rose and fell. Treaties were made, then broken. The Templars held fast, guarding what cities remained, defending pilgrims, and supporting the dwindling Christian presence in the region. But slowly, the territory they protected shrank. One by one, towns fell, fortresses were lost, allies withdrew. The once strong network of Crusader states narrowed until Acre became one of the last great strongholds. Imagine Acre in its final days. The sky is bright, the sea restless. Ships crowd the harbor, some bringing supplies, others preparing to flee. The streets are filled with anxious voices. Templars stand watch from the towers, their eyes scanning the horizon where enemy ships the water like dark shadows. Inside their fortress, the brothers prepare for siege with the same calm devotion they had shown all their lives. The final assault came with overwhelming force. Walls crumbled under bombardment. Smoke filled the air. The Templars fought fiercely, refusing to surrender, but the city could not be saved. When Acre fell in 1291, it marked the end of Crusader presence in the Holy Land. The surviving Templars retreated to Cyprus, carrying with them the weight of loss, the memory of decades of service, and the sorrow of leaving behind a land that had defined their order. And yet, through the devastation, their discipline never wavered. Even in defeat, they upheld their vows, their unity, and their purpose. They had not failed. They had simply been overtaken by the turning of history, by forces larger than themselves, by the natural ebb and flow of empires. But the fall of Jerusalem and Acre reshaped everything. The Holy Land, the heart of the Templars' existence, was no longer within their reach. Their mission, once clear and concrete, was now blurred. What was a knight meant to do when the land he was sworn to protect was lost? This question lingered, soft and persistent, like a drifting echo across the sea. And though the Templars carried on, adapting to new circumstances, the world around them was shifting yet again. Their challenges were no longer only on distant battlefields. A new danger, subtle, political, and deeply human, was rising in Europe, a danger that would soon threaten the entire order in ways none of them could have imagined. When the Templars left the Holy Land for the final time, they carried with them more than their weapons and armor. They carried memories of sunlit stone walls, of distant mountains glowing at dusk, a quiet strength they had poured into their mission for nearly 2 centuries. As they sailed towards Cyprus, the sea wind cool against their faces. Each brother felt the weight of loss settle gently upon his shoulders. The Holy Land had been their purpose, their anchor, their identity. Without it, the world felt strangely unsteady, as if the ground beneath them shifted with each passing day. Cyprus greeted them with the warm scent of the Mediterranean. Salt in the air, trees rustling softly in the breeze, and waves breaking gently against rocky shores. It was peaceful compared to the turmoil they had left behind, yet peace did not bring clarity. Here, on this island far from the sacred cities they once protected, the Templars had to reshape their mission. They were still bound by their vows, still devoted, still united. But the question hung quietly in their hearts. What were they meant to protect now? Their commandery on Cyprus became their new home. It was smaller than their grand fortresses of the east, but it hummed with the familiar rhythm of Templar life. Brothers rose before dawn, prayed in chapels lit by morning light, trained in open courtyards, and tended to daily tasks with the same calm discipline they had always known. Yet the sound of waves replaced the desert wind. The horizon was a line of endless blue instead of rolling dunes, and their purpose, once so sharp, had softened like footprints fading on sand. Imagine a group of Templars gathered on a balcony overlooking the sea. The evening sky glows in gentle shades of pink and gold. The brothers stand in silence, their white cloaks fluttering softly behind them. They speak little, but their thoughts move quietly through shared understanding. They have not failed, they have simply been uprooted. And now, like seeds carried by the wind, they must find new soil. Their role gradually shifted from defending land to preserving stability. They still protected pilgrims when needed. They still managed their estates across Europe. They still trained, prayed, and lived according to their vows. But their military purpose was now uncertain. Without a holy battlefield, their swords remained sheathed more often than drawn. Meanwhile, across Europe, their influence continued to grow. Their farms prospered. Their financial networks expanded. Their reputation remained strong, at least on the surface. Kings still trusted them with treasure, and nobles still admired their discipline. But beneath these relationships, subtle tensions were brewing. Imagine a royal court in France. Tapestries hang on the walls, nobles whisper in clusters, and the scent of incense lingers in the air. At the far end of the hall, advisors discuss the state of the kingdom. They speak of taxes, debts, armies, and alliances. And eventually, the topic shifts toward the Templars, those independent knights with wealth spread across Europe and loyalty tied only to the Pope. Their independence, once admired, now seemed inconvenient. Their power, once reassuring, now felt like competition. Their discipline, once praised, now appeared unyielding. And in a world where rulers sought tighter control, an order as autonomous as the Templars inevitably attracted suspicious glances. Cyprus itself was not free of political tensions. Rivalries simmered between local rulers. The Templars were both valued and watched, respected yet kept at a distance. They had become guardians without a battlefield, and their presence reminded many of a past that was fading into memory. Yet the brothers continued their routines, trusting that their purpose would reveal itself in time. Letters arriving from Europe carried news that felt distant yet important. Some commanderies faced disputes with local lords. Others encountered disagreements with bishops. Although the Templars obeyed the Pope alone, not every local authority appreciated that freedom. And in an age where power often hinged on land and influence, even small conflicts could grow into something larger. Imagine a Templar reading such a letter by candlelight. The flame flickers gently as his eyes move across the parchment. The news is not alarming, yet it is troubling, not in its details, but in what those details suggest: a changing world, a shifting tide, a quiet undercurrent of discomfort among those who once relied on or admired the order. The brother rolls up the letter with steady hands, but he cannot ignore the feeling that the order is being pulled into a new kind of struggle. The absence of the Holy Land also had a spiritual effect. The Templars had always been warriors of faith, guided by sacred geography. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, Acre. These cities shaped their prayers, their vows, their identity. On Cyprus, their prayers remained fervent, but their connection to those holy sites now felt like a memory drifting just out of reach. Their hearts were faithful, But something essential had shifted. Purpose, once clear and tangible, had become something they had to rediscover. And yet, despite these challenges, the order continued to grow. New recruits joined. Donors still offered land and support. Pilgrims still trusted the Templars when traveling through Europe. Outwardly, the order seemed stable, strong, unified, respected. But inwardly, a quiet fragility had begun to take shape, a sense that the foundation beneath them had changed forever. Imagine the Templars riding along the coastline of Cyprus. The sun glitters on the sea. Their horses move with practiced grace. Their armor gleams softly in the light. To an observer, they appear unshakable, the same disciplined knights they had always been. But the brothers know the truth. Behind their calm expressions lies the awareness that they are navigating a world very different from the one they were created for. Their mission had once been a straight path. Now it was winding. Their purpose had once been solid. Now it was shifting. And though they remained united, devoted, and strong, the uncertainty of their future settled over them like a faint, persistent mist. They did not know that, in Europe, forces were slowly gathering, forces that cared little for their service, their sacrifices, or their devotion. The world was changing, and the Templars could not see the full shape of what approached. But they felt it, quietly, like a change in the air before a storm. In the years after fall of the Holy Land, when the Templars lived quietly on Cyprus and managed their duties across Europe, a new force began to rise. Subtle at first, then sharper, then undeniable. It did not come from an enemy on the battlefield or a rival order in the East. It came from within Europe itself. At the center of this growing tide stood a king whose ambition stretched far beyond the edges of his own kingdom. King Philip IV of France. Philip was not a warrior king. He was not known for heroic charges or battlefield triumphs. Instead, his power lay in strategy, calculation, and a relentless hunger for control. He believed deeply in the authority of the monarchy, and even more deeply in his own right to shape the destiny of France. His court was filled with advisors, scribes, and officials who understood his methods well. Every decision was deliberate, every alliance chosen for advantage, every conflict viewed through the lens of power. But beneath the polished surface of his rule, Philip faced a constant problem: money. France's wars, administration, and grand ambitions required resources that seemed to slip through his fingers no matter how tightly he tried to hold them. Debts grew, coffers dwindled, taxation increased, but the pressure only deepened resentment among nobles and citizens alike. Philip needed a solution, and he needed it quickly. The Templars, with their vast land holdings, financial expertise, and deep reserves of wealth, became an answer too tempting for him to ignore. Imagine Philip in his royal chambers at night, pacing slowly across polished floors while advisors speak in low voices. The room is lit by flickering candles. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, the king considers the situation. His treasury is strained. His relationships with the church are complicated. His authority is challenged by nobles who resist his taxes. And yet, throughout France, the Templars thrive, disciplined, wealthy, and untouchable beneath the protection of the Pope. To Philip, this was not simply an inconvenience. It was a threat. The Templars obeyed no king. Their loyalty belonged solely to their order and to the Pope. They owned fortified houses and vast lands across France. They controlled financial networks more sophisticated than anything the crown could replicate. And so long as they remained respected and autonomous, they stood outside Philip's reach. In his eyes, no power in France should exist independently of the throne. His suspicion grew slowly, like a shadow lengthening across the floor. Some of his advisors encouraged these fears, whispering that the Templars were too rich, too secretive, too influential. Others simply reminded him that if he could somehow access their wealth, many of his problems would vanish instantly. But Philip knew something important. He could not act openly against the Templars without cause. They were admired across Europe. They were revered by many nobles. Their service in the Holy Land still carried emotional weight. Any move against them without evidence, or the appearance of evidence, would spark outrage. So Philip waited. He watched. He gathered allies quietly, and he began planting seeds of distrust. At the same time, his relationship with the church grew strained. He frequently clashed with the Pope over authority and taxation. Philip believed kings should hold the highest power within their own lands, while the Pope maintained that spiritual authority exceeded all earthly claims. Their conflict simmered, occasionally boiling, but never fully calming. When Pope Boniface VIII died, and later his successor also passed away, Philip saw an opportunity. The new Pope, Clement V, was more cautious, more hesitant to anger the French king, and more willing to compromise. Philip sensed he could shape events in ways previously unthinkable. Imagine Clement V in his chambers, burdened by the weight of Europe's demands. The papacy was under pressure. Politics twisted through every corner of his responsibilities. Philip's influence hovered nearby, persistent and heavy. Clement wanted peace, stability, balance. But Philip wanted dominance, especially over the fate of the Templars. Meanwhile, the Templars themselves continued their routines, unaware of how deeply suspicion had taken root in the French court. They managed their estates. They trained new brothers. They handled financial matters with the same precision they had always shown. Their stronghold in Paris was one of the most secure treasuries in Europe, holding gold, jewels, documents, and valuables trusted to them by kings and nobles. Ironically, some of these treasures belonged to Philip himself. But trust can be a fragile thing. Rumors began spreading through France. Quietly at first, like the soft rustle of leaves before a storm. People whispered that the Templars conducted strange rituals behind closed doors, that their initiation ceremonies were secretive and unsettling, that they worshiped hidden idols or committed sins to test loyalty. None of these stories had proof. Many were exaggerations or distortions. But in a world where mystery often bred fear, such tales found fertile ground. Philip encouraged these whispers. Each rumor weakened the order's untouchable status. Each doubt nudged public opinion. Each accusation, however strange, created a crack in the Templars' reputation. Imagine a merchant in a tavern hearing for the first time that the Templars were not as holy as they appeared. He frowns, uncertain. But another voice repeats the story. Then another. Eventually, the rumor becomes a shared belief, regardless of truth. Philip understood the power of such doubt. He also understood timing. When the moment felt right, he made his move, swift, quiet, and devastating. Europe had not yet witnessed what awaited, and the Templars could not imagine that a king they had assisted, protected, and supported would turn against them so completely. But Philip's motivations were not rooted in gratitude. They were rooted in power. The clash between Philip and the Templars was not loud or explosive at first. It began like a tightening rope, pressure building, tensions growing, events quietly aligning. Philip had decided that the days of Templar independence were numbered, and once his mind was set, he began preparing for a strike that would change history forever. While the Templars on Cyprus wondered what their next mission might be, while commanders across Europe continued their peaceful routines, while brothers prayed in their chapels and ate their simple meals, the most dangerous enemy they would ever face was quietly sharpening his plans in a royal chamber far to the west. And soon, the storm he was shaping would sweep across France with a force the Templars had never encountered, not from an army, but from the heart of a king driven by ambition, debt, suspicion, and a desire to control every corner of his realm. What unfolded next was unlike anything the Templars had ever faced. They had endured battles, sieges, and the loss of the Holy Land itself, but nothing prepared them for an enemy who arrived not with armies or swords, but with whispers, documents, and soldiers who carried orders instead of fear. It began quietly, like the early hours of a storm, still dark and expectant, and then suddenly it broke. It was the morning of Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date whispered through history with an almost mythical weight. The sun had barely risen when soldiers across France began moving as one. They knocked on gates, pushed open doors, and delivered the same command wherever they went: seize the Templars. Every brother, every clerk, every knight, every servant associated with the order was to be arrested under the authority of King Philip IV. Imagine being inside the Paris Temple that morning, a fortified compound of stone towers, courtyards, storerooms, and quiet chambers where brothers prayed at dawn. The air is cool, filled with the soft glow of the rising sun. Templars kneel in the chapel, whispering their morning prayers as they had done thousands of times before. Footsteps echo in the corridors as the day's work quietly begins. It feels like any other day. Then the sound changes. Horses outside the walls, boots striking the ground in coordinated rhythm, the heavy thud of fists pounding against the gate. At first, the brothers do not understand, but within moments, the truth becomes clear. They are being taken. The gates burst open. Royal soldiers flood inside, men wearing the colors of the French crown, carrying weapons and scrolls bearing the royal seal. They are not confused or hesitant. They know exactly what they've been sent to do. The Templars, bound by vows of obedience and peace unless in battle, do not resist. They step back in confusion, some still in their cloaks from morning prayer, others with tools in hand from beginning their daily tasks. The brothers are ordered to stand still as lists are read aloud. Names echoed across the courtyard. Some look stunned. Others murmur brief prayers under their breath. Across France, the same scene plays out dozens, then hundreds of times. In commanderies large and small, from busy cities to quiet countryside estates, soldiers confront the Templars with accusations so shocking that many brothers can barely understand what is being said. Charges of heresy, charges of idolatry, charges of blasphemy, corruption, unnatural practices, words that sting like cold wind, words the Templars have never heard connected to their order, words that feel surreal, as if spoken in a dream where nothing makes sense. But this was no dream. King Philip had prepared meticulously. He had gathered informants, some unreliable, some desperate, some coerced. He had shaped accusations that played upon fear, superstition, and ignorance. He had crafted a narrative so dark and disturbing that ordinary people, already uneasy about the order's secrecy, could be convinced that something sinister lurked behind the Templar walls. The arrested Templars were taken to prisons, damp, cold spaces built of stone, where the air smelled of mildew and old iron. They were separated, isolated from one another to prevent communication. Many were confused. Many believed the Pope would free them. Many prayed, trusting that the truth would overcome whatever falsehoods had taken root. But Philip's plan had only begun. Over the coming days, the accusations multiplied. Public declarations spread across France. The Templars were accused of denying Christ, spitting on a cross, worshipping strange idols, engaging in immoral acts, and practicing forbidden rituals during their initiation ceremonies. None of these accusations matched the life the brothers lived. None reflected their vows, their prayers, their decades of service. But rumors do not require truth. They require repetition. And Philip ensured repetition. Interrogations began. Some brothers, strong in spirit and mind, held firm. They declared their innocence calmly, confidently. They explained their rights, defended their vows, and spoke of their service. But others, especially those who were older, weaker, or frightened, found themselves facing pressures they could not endure. For the interrogations were not gentle. Imagine a dim prison chamber lit by a single torch. A Templar sits on a wooden stool, exhausted, hungry, and shivering. Around him stand inquisitors with stern faces, men determined to extract confessions. They demand answers. They twist questions. They accuse with rising intensity. And when words do not break him, they turn to methods designed to crush both body and spirit. Some Templars endured torture. Tightening cords, stretching racks, burning coals used to weaken resolve. Brothers who had spent their lives in service found themselves confronted by pain they had never imagined. Under such agony, truth and desperation blurred. Some confessed the crimes they never committed, hoping the torment would stop. Others whispered the words inquisitors wanted to hear through choked breaths, unable to distinguish between survival and surrender. But even in the midst of suffering, many brothers resisted. Some refused to confess despite unbearable pain. Others retracted their forced admissions when they later stood before papal authorities. Their courage became silent proof of their faith. Yet their resistance was not enough to stop the tide Philip had set in motion. Outside the prisons, the world watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. The Templars had once been symbols of purity and strength. Now their name was shadowed by accusations so grave that people struggled to understand. Some believed the charges. Others doubted them. But uncertainty alone was enough to unravel trust. Even the Pope felt pulled by conflicting forces. Clement V, pressured by Philip, hesitated, then reluctantly agreed to investigations. He did not fully trust the king's motives, yet he feared instability within the church. The Templars, bound by obedience to the Pope, remained hopeful, but hope flickered like a candle in a storm. Meanwhile, within the prisons, the brothers clung to faith. Imagine them praying in the darkness, whispering psalms they had memorized as novices. The words offered fragile comfort in a world that no longer made sense. They had fought for Jerusalem. They had protected pilgrims. They had lived in poverty and discipline for decades, and now they were called heretics. Their confusion was deep and painful. Outside, trials began forming. Lists of confessions, many extracted under torture, were presented as evidence. Public opinion shifted further. The king declared victory. The narrative had taken root, and the Templars, once guardians of the Holy Land, now found themselves powerless, stripped of rights, wealth, and freedom. Yet through it all, their dignity endured. Even shackled, even accused, even pressured by the full weight of a king's ambition, the Templars remained steady, united by vows that had shaped their lives. They did not break in spirit, even when their bodies trembled. The arrests and confessions marked the beginning of the end, not just for individual brothers, but for the entire order. And while they could not yet see the full shape of what lay ahead, they knew they were facing a force unlike any they had encountered before, a force driven by politics, fear, power, and one king's unrelenting ambition. The trials that followed the arrests unfolded not with the swiftness of a sword strike, but with the slow, grinding weight of a wheel turning against stone. They stretched across months, then years, as if time itself had thickened around the Templars, trapping them in a world where truth mattered less than appearances, and where justice had become something distant, blurry, and fragile. What the brothers had endured during their arrest was only the beginning. Now they face a labyrinth of accusations, hearings, and political forces that move silently beneath the surface, like unseen currents pushing them further from the life they had once known. Imagine a tribunal hall in France. A cold stone chamber with high ceilings, narrow windows, and the faint smell of ink and parchment lingering in the air. At the far end sits a panel of officials, some stern, some exhausted, some conflicted. Before them stand the Templars, their once proud white mantles replaced by simple garments worn thin by imprisonment. Their hands are tied or trembling, their faces tired but steady. The flickering light of torches casts long shadows across the floor, each shape stretching like a reminder of time passing slowly. The questions begin again. They are questions the brothers have heard countless times. Accusations of heresy, of worshipping strange idols, of committing sins that contradict everything the order stood for. Some officials ask because they want answers. Others ask because they want confirmation. And others ask simply because they're required to, even if their hearts resist the task. For many brothers, the trials reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. Some had confessed under torture and now sought to retract those words, their voices soft but determined. Others, who had resisted entirely, repeated their innocence with calm clarity. Still others were too weakened to speak at all, their bodies failing them after months in prison. Yet despite their suffering, there was a thread of quiet dignity that ran through their testimonies. The Templars did not shout. They did not plead. They spoke with the steadiness of men who knew their lives had been built on truth, even if the world refused to see it. Outside the tribunal halls, a different reality unfolded. Kings and nobles whispered among themselves. Clergy debated in private chambers. Ministers weighed loyalty against advantage. The trials were not simply about guilt or innocence. They had become a mirror reflecting the shifting power of Europe. Every decision, every declaration, every rumor carried political consequences. Those who supported the Templars risked angering King Philip. Those who opposed the order risked questioning the authority of the Pope. Many chose silence, hoping the storm would pass without drawing them into its path. The Pope himself, Clement V, struggled beneath the burden of conflicting forces. Letters arrived from all corners of Europe, some condemning the Templars, others defending them. Bishops sent reports, some shaped by fear, others by obligation. Clement read confessions made under torture and wondered whether they could be trusted. He listened to testimony from brothers who proclaimed innocence with unwavering clarity. He saw an order devoted to service and prayer, and he saw a king determined to dismantle it. In his heart, Clement hesitated. He sought more evidence. He sent inquiries. He tried to slow the pace of Philip's campaign. But the king's influence grew heavier with each passing season. France was powerful. Its voice carried weight, and Clement, already facing pressures from many sides, found himself entangled in political knots that tightened no matter how carefully he tried to loosen them. Meanwhile, the trials continued. Imagine a small town in England where a handful of Templars are brought before local officials. The room is quiet except for the crackle of fire in the hearth. Villagers gather outside, murmuring, trying to understand what crimes these knights, who once helped their families, could have committed. The brothers stand calmly as accusations are read. They speak gently, explaining their rituals, their prayers, their mission. Many English officials view the charges with skepticism. Some trials even result in acquittals. But the decision of one kingdom cannot outweigh the force gathering in France. In Aragon, in Portugal, in Germany, the same questions echo across different languages, different halls, different courts. But everywhere, the Templars show the same stillness. Some cry silently as memories of torture return with every question. Some remain stoic, hands folded, voices steady. Others stare at the floor, praying quietly beneath their breath. But none of them rage. They do not strike out in anger. Their discipline, forged over decades, holds firm even as the world tries to dismantle the very foundation of their lives. Some of the brothers who had confessed under torture now found themselves unable to retract their statements. They feared renewed suffering. They feared death. Yet even those who remained silent carried the same quiet truth inside their hearts. They knew what they had lived. They knew the vows they had kept. Their lives had been shaped by service, sacrifice, and devotion. And though the accusations were painful, they could not erase the reality of those years. As the trials dragged on, a sense of growing finality settled over the order. Strongholds were seized. Lands were confiscated. Wealth passed into royal hands. Commanderies that had once hummed with quiet purpose now stood empty or repurposed. The rhythm of Templar life, prayers at dawn, shared meals, candlelit evenings, began to fade from Europe like a memory slipping beneath the surface of water. Yet even in decline, the brothers remained united. Imagine them in prison cells at night, whispering prayers to one another through cracks in the stone. Their voices are soft, barely audible, but filled with a warmth that defies their circumstances. They pray for each other, for their missing brothers, for the order, for the world. Even in chains, their faith remains gentle and steady. The trials were not only tearing apart the Templars, they were testing the moral fabric of Europe. Some officials left hearings feeling uneasy, knowing the accusations felt wrong. Some clergy wept privately, unable to reconcile the Templars' suffering with their own understanding of justice. Others convinced themselves that the process was necessary. And some, driven by fear or allegiance, simply allowed the tide to carry them forward. But the tide was unmistakable. Slowly, painfully, the trials nudged the Templars toward an edge from which there would be no return. The accusations, repeated enough times, began to overshadow the truth. And as months turned to years, the world grew accustomed to the idea that the order might truly be guilty. Doubt, once soft and uncertain, hardened into belief for many. Yet the Templars themselves did not harden. They remained who they had always been, brothers bound by vows, praying in silence, holding on to dignity even as the world misjudged them. The long, slow undoing had begun, and though they could not see the final outcome, they felt its approach like a distant wave building in strength, preparing to break. The end of the Templars arrived not with the sound of battle, but with a quiet, heavy finality that settled across Europe like a slow-falling dusk. After years of trials, interrogations, and accusations, the fate of the order rested in the hands of the Church. Pope Clement V, pressured from many sides, especially by King Philip IV, made the decision that would close the final chapter. In solemn chambers far from the commanderies where brothers once prayed in unity, the order was dissolved, not because guilt was proven, but because fear and politics demanded resolution. Across Europe, Templars heard the news in silence. Some were imprisoned, some exiled, some released with nowhere to return. Their lands were seized, their armor stored away, their symbols removed from sight. The brothers looked around to quiet halls that had once echoed with prayer and purpose, now empty and fading into the ordinary world. Some Templars stepped into new lives, carrying their vows only in memory. Others remained in cells, still waiting for justice that never came. A few, especially in France, faced harsh punishment. Yet even in the face of uncertainty, many kept their dignity, moving through their final days with the same discipline that had shaped their lives. The end was not an explosion, but a fading, like the last flame of a candle shrinking into a soft glow before dark. The Templars had lived with purpose, served with devotion, and carried their mission across continents. And now, as their order dissolved into history, the world grew quieter, holding only the echo of who they had been. Even after the Templars vanished from their commanderies and fortresses, their presence lingered, woven into the corners of Europe's memory. People continue to speak of them in soft tones, sometimes with sorrow, sometimes with awe, and often with an air of mystery. Their story did not simply disappear. Instead, it expanded, becoming something larger than the years they physically existed. Their influence lived on in architecture, round churches inspired by the Holy Sepulchre, stone fortresses built with precision, and chapels whose walls still carried the faint echo of prayer. It lived on in systems of finance, in methods of record-keeping, and in careful organization that later orders would emulate. Even as they faded from sight, the structures they created remained like quiet footprints in the landscape. But their deepest legacy unfolded in the realm of myth. People wondered where their wealth had gone, what secrets they had kept, and whether their final days had knowledge not meant for the world. Tales of hidden treasures, sacred relics, and ancient wisdom began spreading from one generation to the next. The Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, secret archives beneath the Temple Mount. These legends grew from whispers into stories cherished and retold. Writers, artists, and dreamers brought the Templars into their creations. They were cast as protectors, mystics, rebels, or guardians of forgotten truths. Over time, the line between history and imagination blurred, until the Templars became symbols, representing courage, discipline, sacrifice, or mystery depending on who told the story. Their order was gone, but their legacy moved like a quiet current beneath history, steady, persistent, and constantly reshaping itself as centuries passed. As the long story of the Knights Templar draws to a close, the world around you softens, like the final light of evening gently slipping below the horizon. Their tale, filled with devotion, courage, mystery, rise, fall, and echoing legacy, now settles into a quiet place within the vast landscape of history. And as you drift with these last moments, the pace slows, the shadows deepen, and the world becomes calm, like a blooming night sky stretching endlessly overhead. Imagine standing beneath a peaceful sky, far from the battles, far from the courts, far from the deserts, fortresses, and distant shores. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and nighttime blossoms. The stars shine gently, scattered like small embers across the darkness. Everything feels still, balanced, and timeless. This is where the long journey of the Templars finally rests, not in chaos or conflict, but in quiet reflection. Their story began with 9 humble knights, men who sought only to protect pilgrims on dangerous roads. They lived simply, prayed deeply, and rode through dusty landscapes with hearts guided by purpose. Over time, they became symbols of strength, pillars of discipline, and guardians of holy places. Their castles rose like stone giants. Their white mantles fluttered like wings of devotion. Their unity carried them across continents. And yet, like all things touched by time, their story transformed. They rose, they served, they endured. Then, slowly, the world shifted beneath their feet. Battles changed. Kings grew restless. Rumors spread like smoke. And the order, once so steady and bright, dimmed beneath forces that had little to do with faith and everything to do with power. Still, through every chapter, victory or sorrow, growth or decline, the brothers remained who they were at heart. Men who lived by vows meant to guide them toward humility, compassion, and discipline. They prayed together. They worked together. They comforted one another in darkness. They held steady when the world turned against them. And even in their final moments, they faced fate with dignity, courage, and quiet strength. Now imagine all the places they once walked slowly fading into twilight. The roads to Jerusalem, soft with dust beneath horse hooves. The strongholds perched on cliffs, glowing orange from the last rays of sun. The commanderies in Europe, their fields whispering beneath morning mists. The bustling ports of Acre, alive with merchants and seabirds. Each place settles into memory, as if gently laying down to sleep. The brothers themselves drift into that same soft twilight. Their prayers, once spoken in stone chapels, echo faintly now like distant music carried on a gentle wind. Their footsteps fade across time. Their white mantles blend into the darkness, like feathers falling through a dream. Yet the calm that surrounds them now is not sorrowful. It is peaceful, almost comforting. Their work is done. Their story is complete. And the world they helped shape remains full of quiet reminders of who they were. Fortresses still standing, traditions still alive, myths still whispered, and lessons still carried in the hearts of those who seek courage in the face of uncertainty. Imagine yourself sitting beneath the stars, listening to this fading tale as the night deepens around you. The world grows softer, quieter, as if inviting you to breathe more deeply. Each breath becomes slower. Each moment becomes gentler. The Templar story becomes a warm blanket of history, settling over your mind, guiding it toward rest. In the quiet of the night, you can almost feel the presence of those ancient brothers, not as warriors or legends, but as steady, peaceful figures moving slowly through the edges of memory. Their story drifts like soft waves washing against the shore, rhythmic and soothing. It carries no urgency now, no battles, no trials, only calmness. As the stars shine above, imagine one last image. A single Templar standing alone on a hill, his armor removed, his cloak loose around his shoulders. He watches the sky, the land, the distant horizon that once called him to serve. His face is serene. His heart is still. The world is quiet. Slowly, he bows his head, not in defeat, but in peaceful acceptance. His journey, long and filled with meaning, has come to rest. And so, too, does yours. Let the story drift away now, like a lantern floating across calm water. Let the last echoes fade into the dark. Let your breath become soft and steady. Let your body sink deeper into comfort, supported by the quiet, by the stillness, by the gentle embrace of rest. The tale of the Knights Templar is complete for tonight. All that remains is peace, calm, and the soft glow of history settling into silence.